Hey everyone, Dr. Kuniak with a supplementary video lecture. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the questions that I've had come up over the course of the week. Specifically, uh, two of them pertain to the article critique, and then one of them is more about research and assessment and stuff in general. So I'm going to start with the article, and I apologize, that's my scanner. Um, Speaking of research, I'm scanning a whole bunch of my old research documents and trying to make them PDFs so that I don't have as much paper laying around. I have deja vu. I may have said that before. In any case, two of the questions pertain to the article critique. I'll talk about those first, and then I'll talk about research-related topics in general. So, one of the questions was about primary and secondary sources. There's a prompt in in the rubric in the outline that's at the end of the syllabus about use of primary and secondary sources as a topic area for the article critique. I don't want you to go through and systematically assess every individual article referenced in the article that you're critiquing. Some reference sections can be pretty long, and so I feel like that would be a lot of extra work for very little net gain in the assignment. What I'd like you to do is take a look and kind of spot check through and see if you are noticing more primary or more secondary sources in the references, and then just make a statement or two about it as part of that section of the article critique. Hopefully they have more primary sources. That tends to be what we shoot for. But as many of you are finding out, you can't always find the research articles that you're looking for the way that you imagine that you would find them. So it's just one of those things to check. But I don't need stats on exactly how many primary and how many secondary sources exist in the reference section. I just want you to kind of talk about it generally. Again, just kind of spot check through and give kind of an average discussion of that. There was another question related to use of first person in the article critique. I don't really mind first person at all, generally. In your article proposal, I would prefer if you use third person. So for your final capstone assignment, I would prefer first person or third person, but it's not necessary because you're not turning this stuff in as though it's going to like a journal or it's going to, peer review in some form. It's just going to me. And so if it's more comfortable to use first person for you, especially for the article critique, I'm fine with that. If it's more comfortable for you to use third person and say this counselor in training, this student researcher, this whatever, that's totally fine too. If you can, I would err to it on the final draft of the. You know what? Change my mind. Just first person is fine for all of it. Sorry, that's just. I feel like that's just going to confuse more people. So, first person is fine across the board. I really don't have a preference. My goal is for you to pay more attention to the material and what you're getting out of it than it is to be a stickler for first person, third person, font. I mean, Times New Roman, please. That's just APA. And I'm used to seeing it at this point. But, I'm not a huge. I think of all of my colleagues, and not just talking about at Lockhaven, but all of my colleagues in my career, I am least concerned with those sort of things. I just want it all to appear professional and sound professional. So if you're more comfortable with third person, that's fine, and this is for all of your assignments. If you are more comfortable with first person, then I'm fine with that too. You don't have to be. It's just coming to me. So I would rather you get the experience out of it. Sorry about going back and forth, but now we have that formally out there. The other question I had was related to headings, so I'm going to try something new and see if I can share something on my screen here. This is not Zoom I'm recording in. I have I've been playing around with new software, so let's see. That should be a web. There we go. That should be a website for you. That's actually the Purdue OWL. You can use the APA publication manual, but the Purdue OWL has some great resources. So primarily for your, and hopefully you can see my mouse too, primarily for, maybe you can't, so I'm going to point. this hand. Obviously, I'm new to this. Primarily for your proposal, and for the article critique for that matter, if you're breaking into sections, you'll probably be doing more of level 1 and level 2 headings. So level 1, when you like identify like introduction, for example, that would be a level 1 heading. And then if you then go below that and put like purpose, for example, that would be a level 2 heading. So level 1 headings are centered, boldface, um, centered, boldface, yeah, title, case, heading. And then a level 2 is flush left. And then the next paragraph that comes underneath it will be indented and not bold and all that sort of stuff. So first level, there we go, is going to be centered, bold. Second level headings are flush left and bold. For this, you're not going to need third level headings, which are italicized and all that. Don't worry about it. Just introduction, purpose, literature review, talk about anxiety. I don't know why that one always comes to mind for me. Depression, those would be level 2 headings. And then talk about the literature for anxiety, talk about the literature for depression, whatever your topic is. The variables you're looking at in that case would be the subheadings, the level 2 headings. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. How's that? New tools for me. And then we can talk about the other question that I've got, and it's come up a bunch of times. I think I addressed this in an earlier video briefly, talking about how to do the literature review and how to kind of close in on specific literature that you really need if you've got a lot to look at, or how to broaden it if you don't have enough literature on a topic. Go back further than 5 years, not preferred, but if you're not finding anything, look further, see if there's anything in the distant past. But I've had a couple questions recently about what if I can't find an article that has the variables that I'm looking for in it. So for example, since I mentioned anxiety, depression, we'll just play with that and we'll say, the purpose of our study is to assess, use of existential treatment models for reduction in anxiety, anxiety scores. So we're going to start looking for research associated with anxiety and existential counseling. I don't know that there's a lot of research articles out there on that. Partially because I've never searched for it, I just made it up as we're talking. But there may not be articles, even if you search way back, that address those two specific variables or more specific. I know some of you have multiple different variables that you're playing around with, that they may not address them specifically, and that's okay. So a way that you can approach this is you can look up articles related to, in my example, existential counseling, and then you can also look up what is most current as far as our understanding about anxiety. And so you can then look at how existential counseling has been used to treat other things and how anxiety is treated by other methods, and then try to draw some conclusions out of the literature to see if there's any overlap. It's possible that there's another variable that you're not aware of that connects these, and so that becomes a point of consideration. It's possible that there's not, but you can start to make you can start to draw some conclusions based on what you're seeing in other areas of the literature, and then that actually becomes kind of an argument for doing your study, because we know all of these things about existential counseling and we know all of these things about anxiety, but we don't know about the interaction between these two variables. So it makes I keep wanting to say that it makes the literature review more complicated, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it makes it more dynamic, so you have to approach it a little bit differently, but I think that it almost sets up your argument better because no such existing literature seems to appear. So of course we need to explore this because we know all of these different things. So, a little bit more challenging in some ways, but actually maybe easier in other ways. So that's just something I've answered that question a handful of times over the last 2 weeks, and I thought, maybe I'll talk about it a little bit better. Not to draw on my gaming topic too much, apologize if that be the case, but my articles are a good example to draw from. With my dissertation, for example, which I showed you all in the video last week, I actually did some of that because at the time there was not a lot of literature out there on the use of video games and games in general and mental health variables. And so I wanted to look at personality. I knew that was a variable that I wanted to look at. And my dissertation chair at the time said, you want to have some sort of a dependent variable that's going to give, that in his opinion, that's going to give some sort of weight. So like that's going to have some sort of meaning to it. So in that case, I chose resiliency because it was an area of interest for me. And so when I started looking into articles associated with gaming, personality, and resiliency, there was nothing. So gaming became its own sort of exploration of the literature without any other variables associated with it. And as I started to dig into personality and resiliency, there were connections between personality and coping methods, choice coping methods, and resiliency, and discussion between coping methods and resiliency, and perhaps individual people's outlooks, which on life in general, which relates back to personality. And so I drew in that additional variable of coping strategies because it came up so often between the other two variables that I was searching for. So you never quite know what you're going to get when you start digging into the literature. But if you're not finding exact connections, you may have to... So when we talked about that big idea, getting down into the very small topic that you're exploring, you can still stay focused on that very small topic, but you may have to go a couple levels up and look at some of the broader research literature that exists a little further up the chain to build out your lit review and to make some of the arguments that you're making. So I hope that all makes sense. I hope that that's useful for a supplemental video lecture for the week. Please do keep sending me questions. They're giving me what I think are great ideas for this content. I hope it's useful for you. And if it's not, send me some other ideas because I want to make sure that I cover what everybody needs. But great work in the class so far, and really interesting questions. And from what I've heard of the different topics that you all are looking at in your critiques and in your proposals, really interesting stuff out there. So good working with you again this week, and certainly reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, any of that.